Sophie Mokoena is back in the country from covering that significant election in Zimbabwe, and she joins us now to talk about the lead up to the elections, the media coverage, the content of the election itself, and perhaps the way forward for Zimbabwe. Sophie, thank you so much for joining us. It was always going to be that story that the whole world was watching. It was a post-Mugabe election in Zimbabwe, but you've covered previous Zimbabwean elections. Did it live up to the kind of hype and drama that was expected before we went into the election?
Yes, it did, because the issue here was what's going to happen post-Mugabe, and you could only do that assessment after the elections. The transition wasn't going to give you an answer in terms of the direction the country was going to take, and that would have been determined by who gets elected as the state president, but also in terms of the party in parliament, which party is going to amass support in parliament. Because to implement any policy, you must have a buy-in from parliament to pass certain laws, perhaps to make amendments or to bring in new changes and new legislation. And therefore you look at the parliament, you look at the person who is likely to be the CEO of the country.
Absolutely.
And it is for that reason, it is only now where one can perhaps give an analysis in terms of what's likely to happen in Zimbabwe.
Besides the post-Mugabe factor, the other thing that the whole world was watching was if Zimbabweans would choose a new path against the ZANU-PF, and they didn't. You were on the ground and talking to ordinary Zimbabweans. What were they saying?
I think human beings are very funny. They are very sympathetic when you are an underdog or you are under siege. The fact that Mnangagwa had to suffer, last year when Mugabe fired him, and the fact that he contributed in bringing Mugabe down in terms of agreeing to lead the country after the military took over, I think people were kind of sympathetic. The party was always going to get that perhaps second chance. Even himself as a leader, he was always going to be considered by many. And for me, that is a reason, because people were so fed up with the former President Mugabe. People were fed up, irrespective of political inclination, color, creed. It was a question of Mugabe must just go. Even in his own party, you had dissenting voice. And therefore, he was a unifying factor in terms of people believing that to have a better Zimbabwe, Mugabe must just go. And
former President Mugabe came out to speak just before the election, but he's been quiet ever since. Do you know if he's had any response to the results?
Not yet, but you'd recall that a day before elections, the media went to the Blue Roof, that is his private residence, and that's where he indicated his views. I mean, he's a very angry old veteran leader, and he made it clear he was not going to vote ZANU-PF. And now that perhaps he had, in terms of going public and expressing his opinion as a former leader of a former particular party and a former leader of the country, maybe some people are like, can you wait a bit? Maybe if Chamisa had won or somebody had won, by now would have had his statement. But what's very catching for him, or perhaps he has to be careful what he says now, he was very strong to say ZEC is credible. That is the Electoral Commission.
Okay.
And Chamisa is questioning that. Secondly, he called on all those who are participating in the presidential election and even the political parties at the parliamentary level to accept the results after the election. Now you have these results. Therefore, he must again come out and say, I accept the results. If he doesn't, we have sound bites. We'll play the sound bites.
You raised a question about gender politics, and that didn't seem to sit well with the room. Well, why do you think that was the case?
No, you know, sometimes people don't understand. As journalists, we have different techniques to get to an answer. Some of us are not so robust and hard and loud and what. We are very strategic. The fact that he was saying he was not going to vote for ZANU-PF but didn't want to divulge who.
Yeah.
I had to come up with a strategy, and I knew there are only 3 people that Mugabe can vote for. Chamisa, if he doesn't vote for ZANU-PF, Joyce Mujuru or Thokozani Kupe. So when he said he's not voting for women because women are already out in terms of support, I knew he was going to vote for Chamisa. So that
Sophie,
was a tactic.
What does this result mean for Joyce Mujuru's future in politics?
Well, I think she can still play a role in Zimbabwe. She's got an experience. And also, I believe women were badly treated in this election. Built up, you find a situation where all the candidates, the women, whether they were at the constituency level or local level, they were insulted. Insulted, Desiree. You must look at the social media. Patriarchy in this continent, on the continent is bad. It's bad.
Quite an important conversation as we celebrate Women's Month.
If she decides to retreat and go back in the corner, you are saying as a woman, when it's tough, women must just be under the table or remain in the kitchen. It can't be.
So you were talking earlier about your strategy in terms of formulating your questions. But as foreign editor, the other thing you strategized was how the SABC was going to cover the Zimbabwean elections. Just take us into the backstory, how that process got underway.
Zimbabwe is a difficult country to work in. We went there with head of news, Patiswa, to prepare the ground, to get everything cleared so that when we get there, we don't have technical problems. And she did a sterling job. And then we looked at the budget as well. How are we going to ensure that we don't use a lot of money, but it's an important story to tell. SABC, it's a African broadcaster. We are the largest. We go to 52 African countries. You look at our digital platform. We are quite popular in Asia, in Europe, in America, on the continent. So what do we do? So it was a serious planning, and we ensured that perhaps we have two different groups, one in Bulawayo, where you have the opposition stronghold. And then also you go to Harare, even though it's an opposition stronghold, but you have most of government buildings and all those ZANU-PF leaders.
What was your general sense of the media coverage even outside of the SABC?
Well, particularly foreign media tried their level best to bring a balance. Internally, it's always difficult on the continent because you find a situation where different media houses
We don't have time anymore, and we're going to continue to talk about this story. But quickly, what do you foresee for the new Zimbabwean administration?
Mnangagwa has made a commitment to reach out to MDC. Let's see whether that happens. And he's got nothing to lose. I mean, if you want the best legacy, Mnangagwa, just do the right thing, unite the country.
Sophie Mokoena is the foreign editor at the SABC, and it's time for sports now.